Astrid Lindgren, an arrogant billionaire who mistreated her employees and became a lonely widow, receives an unexpected invitation from the handyman, Eric Carter, for Christmas dinner. Could a simple Christmas invitation completely transform the life of a woman who has lost everything except her pride? Before we continue, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching the video from. And don't forget to subscribe. Astrid Lindgren stood in her lavish office, realm of opulence that mirrored her status as a billionaire. The walls were adorned with expensive artwork, and the mahogany desk gleamed under the soft glow of an ornate chandelier. She exuded an air of authority, her tailored suit accentuating her poised demeanor. Yet, beneath the surface of her polished exterior lay an arrogance that had become her defining trait. Before her, a nervous employee shuffled papers in trembling hands, his voice barely rising above a whisper as he presented a proposal for a charity initiative. He had spent weeks perfecting the document, believing it could not only benefit the community but also enhance the company's image. Astrid listened with a detached expression, her piercing gaze fixed on the man as if she were assessing his worth rather than considering his ideas. The employee's heart raced as he recounted the potential benefits of the initiative. He knew how rare it was for Astrid to show any interest in the welfare of others, especially those beneath her in the corporate hierarchy. Yet, he clung to the hope that perhaps today would be different. As he spoke, he noticed Astrid's eyes narrowing slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line of disapproval. With a dismissive wave of her hand, she interrupted him mid-sentence. The sound of her voice was icy, cutting through the air like a knife. She questioned his judgment, her words dripping with condescension, as if the very notion of charity were a frivolous distraction unworthy of her attention. The employee's shoulders slumped under the weight of her scorn, and he struggled to maintain composure as she proceeded to belittle his efforts. Astrid thrived in this toxic environment she had cultivated, where fear was the currency of the workplace. As the employee retreated from her office, his head hanging low, the atmosphere in the room shifted. She returned to her work, her mind racing with thoughts of profits and projections, dismissing the lingering echoes of his proposal. There was a time when she might have considered the impact of her decisions on her employees, but that woman felt like a distant memory, buried beneath layers of ambition and disdain. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Astrid received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was somber, delivering the news with a measured tone that felt foreign to her. Her husband, Lars, had been in an accident. A rush of emotions flickered within her, but she quickly suppressed them, convinced that she could handle the situation alone. Hanging up the phone, she dismissed the incident as an inconvenience, a mere blip in her otherwise controlled existence. Lars had always been a steady presence in her life, but she had long since relegated him to the background, a supportive figure whose needs rarely intersected with her ambitious pursuits. Astrid reassured herself that she was more than capable of managing everything without him. After all, she had built her empire through sheer will, and she wouldn't let a mere accident destabilize her world. The evening progressed, and she poured herself a glass of vintage wine, the rich aroma filling the air as she settled into her plush leather chair. The flickering flames of the fireplace cast shadows across the room, but the warmth they provided felt distant to her. Instead of seeking solace in comforting memories or the support of friends, she focused on her work, pushing aside any thoughts of vulnerability. The following day broke with a harsh brightness, the sun flooding through the tall windows of her mansion. Yet, the beauty of the new day was lost on Astrid as she sat at her dining table, the untouched breakfast spread before her. A familiar chill enveloped her, one that had settled deep within her since she had received the news of Lars' accident. A knock on the door startled her, breaking the silence that had settled like a thick fog. She opened it to find one of her staff members, a young woman with wide, concerned eyes. The news of Lars' death hung in the air like a dark cloud, and as the words fell from the woman's lips, Astrid felt as though the ground had been yanked from beneath her feet. Time seemed to freeze as she processed the reality of her husband's absence. Overwhelmed by an emotion she had long kept at bay, she felt a wave of grief crash over her, raw and unrelenting. Yet, in that moment of vulnerability, her instinct was not to embrace the outpouring of sympathy that surrounded her. Instead, she recoiled, shutting the door on the young woman who had only sought to offer her condolences. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed in the vast emptiness of her mansion, a stark reminder of her isolation. Astrid retreated to her office, locking herself away from the world. The walls, once a sanctuary of power and control, now felt like a prison. She sat in silence, the weight of her grief pressing down on her like a heavy mantle. Memories of Lars flooded her mind, each one a reminder of the life they had built together, now shattered. Yet, even in her sorrow, a part of her clung to the belief that she needed no one. The hours turned into an agonizing blur as she avoided any interaction with friends or colleagues who reached out, their messages falling on deaf ears. The lavish parties she once hosted felt like a lifetime ago, and the laughter that had once filled her mansion was replaced with an unsettling quiet. Astrid remained ensconced in her solitude, a choice that only deepened her sorrow, further alienating her from the very people who cared for her. As night fell, the mansion stood silent, an echo of her internal desolation. Outside, the world continued to move on, but for Astrid, time had come to a standstill. She was a woman caught in the throes of her own making, trapped in a cycle of arrogance and isolation. The lavish surroundings that once brought her joy now suffocated her, each luxurious detail a reminder of her loneliness. In that moment, Astrid realized how her choices had carved a chasm between herself and the world around her. The facade of strength she had maintained for so long began to crack, revealing the vulnerability she had fought so hard to suppress. She understood that her arrogance had not only pushed away those who cared, but had also left her empty, devoid of true connection. As the darkness enveloped her mansion, Astrid sat alone in her office, contemplating the path that had led her here. The shadows that danced on the walls mirrored the turmoil within her, and as she gazed out into the night, she felt an unfamiliar pang of longing. The life she had constructed, filled with wealth and power, had come at a cost she was now beginning to fathom. As Christmas approached, the mansion, once vibrant with laughter and life, now felt like a hollow shell, echoing with the remnants of Astrid Lindgren's arrogance and isolation. The grand decorations, glittering lights, ornate garlands, and a towering Christmas tree stood in stark contrast to the desolate atmosphere that enveloped her. Astrid moved through the opulent rooms, her fingers lightly grazing the surfaces, but she felt no warmth, no joy in the holiday splendor. Instead, a heavy cloud of emptiness hung over her, a reminder of her recent loss and the emotional distance she had cultivated over the years. The memories flooded her mind unbidden, moments of her life where kindness could have thrived, yet she chose the armor of arrogance instead. She could picture the faces of those she had dismissed, the employees who had looked to her for guidance or approval, only to receive coldness in return. Each recollection added weight to her already burdened heart, making her more aware of the chasm she had created not only with her husband Lars, but with everyone around her. There had been opportunities for connection, moments when a simple word of encouragement could have transformed the atmosphere, yet she had opted for disdain. Now, standing in her grand hall with its twinkling lights, she felt an unfamiliar pang of regret. As she gazed out the large windows at the swirling snowflakes, Astrid felt trapped by the very wealth that had once defined her. Her life, filled with luxury and privilege, had not shielded her from loneliness. Instead, it had deepened it. The evenings were the hardest, each ticking clock reminding her of the silence that filled the mansion. She could hear the laughter of families celebrating nearby, their joy piercing through her solitude like a knife. A sense of longing enveloped her, a wish that she had nurtured those relationships instead of allowing her pride to dictate her actions. Meanwhile, Eric, the handyman who had worked for her for years, was busying himself with the mundane tasks around the sprawling estate. Despite the chill of the winter air, he found solace in the rhythm of his work, the manual labor providing a welcome distraction from the turmoil of emotions that churned within him. He had always been aware of Astrid's disdainful comments, the way she often belittled the staff, making them feel small in her shadow. Yet, beneath that exterior, he also recognized the fragility of her spirit, the way her eyes sometimes betrayed a longing for connection that she would never admit to. Eric moved through the rooms, adjusting decorations, checking the heating, and ensuring that everything was perfect for the holiday season. He felt a mix of pity and frustration for Astrid, who seemed to wallow in her own self-imposed exile. He pondered the irony of her situation. A billionaire surrounded by opulence, yet utterly alone. The weight of her loneliness felt palpable, and he couldn't help but wonder if she even realized the extent of her isolation. As he worked, Eric decided that perhaps it was time to take a step that could change the course of things. He wanted to extend an olive branch to show Astrid that kindness still existed, even in the harshest of circumstances. With a deep breath, he pinned an invitation to his simple Christmas dinner, a gathering filled with warmth and laughter, the kind of atmosphere that Astrid had long abandoned. He doubted she would accept, given her pride, but he felt compelled to reach out, to offer her a glimpse of what could be if she allowed herself to embrace the world beyond her mansion walls. Once the invitation was crafted, Eric's heart raced with both hope and trepidation. He folded it neatly and placed it on her desk, knowing that it might be met with derision or, at best, indifference. Yet, he believed in the power of connection, the potential for healing that could come from breaking down the barriers she had erected. He returned to his tasks, quietly contemplating the possibility that this small gesture might resonate with her, even if just a little. As the days passed, Astrid's loneliness deepened, the silence of her home becoming an oppressive weight upon her shoulders. She found herself drawn to the invitation resting quietly on her desk, its simple words stirring something within her. The thought of attending Eric's dinner seemed absurd at first, a billionaire gracing the home of a handyman. Yet, the more she considered it, the more the idea morphed from a ridiculous notion into a flicker of possibility. In that moment, she realized how isolated she truly was, how her arrogance had pushed everyone away, including those who might offer her genuine companionship. She picked up the invitation, her fingers trembling slightly, and read it again. Eric's words were warm, inviting, devoid of any pretense. It was a stark contrast to the coldness that had characterized her interactions with him. Could she really step outside of her cocoon of solitude and join someone like him for dinner? Her heart raced at the thought, a mix of fear and curiosity swirling within her. The prospect of laughter and connection felt both terrifying and enticing, a paradox that left her questioning everything she had ever believed about herself and her relationships. The days turned into a blur as Christmas Eve approached, and Astrid found herself standing in front of her mirror, grappling with her decision. The reflection staring back at her was of a woman who had lost so much. Her husband, her connections, her sense of self. Flashbacks of her past interactions with Eric played like a movie in her mind, reminding her of how she had treated him with disdain, how her words had cut like a knife rather than offered warmth. Each memory felt like a weight pulling her down, a reminder of the walls she had built around herself, fortifications that now seemed so unnecessary and sad. In the quiet of her room, Astrid could feel the tension within her reach a breaking point. The fear of rejection battled against a growing desire for connection, for a sense of belonging that had long eluded her. As she analyzed her reflection, she understood that attending Eric's dinner would not simply be about sharing a meal. It would be a confrontation with her own demons, a chance to acknowledge her past mistakes and perhaps start to mend the fractures in her soul. In that moment of clarity, Astrid made a choice. She would go to Eric's Christmas dinner, not just to break the chains of her solitude, but to take the first step towards redemption. The decision sent a rush of emotions through her: anxiety, anticipation, and a flicker of hope. As she prepared herself for the evening ahead, she felt a sense of resolve that had been absent for far too long. Perhaps, just perhaps, the warmth of human connection could thaw the ice around her heart. Astrid Lindgren sat in her expansive, yet empty, mansion, the opulence of her surroundings failing to provide the warmth she so desperately craved. The invitation from Eric, her handyman, lay on the polished mahogany table, a stark contrast to the coldness of her heart. Initially, she had scoffed at the thought of attending a simple Christmas dinner, her mind swirling with images of grandeur and sophistication that she associated with the holiday. The thought of mingling with Eric and his humble family was beneath her, or so she believed. Yet, as the days passed, she found herself drawn to the idea, like a moth to a flame. The days leading up to Christmas Eve were marked by an oppressive silence in the mansion. The echo of her own footsteps felt like a haunting reminder of her isolation. The decorations that adorned her home, glittering baubles and shimmering lights, seemed to mock her solitude, illuminating the emptiness that filled the expansive rooms. Astrid had always prided herself on her ability to control every aspect of her life, but the sudden absence of Lars had unraveled her carefully constructed facade, leaving her vulnerable and exposed. As she stood before the mirror, contemplating her reflection, she felt a tumult of emotions swirling within her. She scrutinized her image, a once vibrant woman now masked in layers of grief and bitterness. Memories flooded her mind, flashbacks of interactions with Eric that replayed like an old film. She remembered the times she had dismissed him with a wave of her hand, the icy remarks that dripped from her lips. In those moments, she had viewed him as nothing more than a cog in the machine of her empire, a mere handyman whose worth was defined by his utility rather than his humanity. Yet, as she recalled those moments, she felt a pang of regret. Eric had always approached his work with a quiet dignity, a stark contrast to her own arrogance. Despite the disdain she had shown him, he had remained steadfast, never faltering in his duties. The thought that he had extended an invitation to her, a gesture of kindness despite her past behavior, gnawed at her conscience. It was a reflection of the very humanity she had long since abandoned. The mirror reflected a woman at war with herself. Astrid was used to being in control, commanding attention and respect through her wealth and status. But now, she felt as though she were standing on the precipice of a decision that could alter the course of her life. The weight of her loneliness pressed down upon her, the silence of the mansion amplifying her internal struggle. Should she attend Eric's dinner? Could she bear the thought of stepping into a world so starkly different from her own? The evening air was crisp and biting as she contemplated her choices. The thought of sitting at a modest table, surrounded by a family that embodied the warmth of the season, both terrified and intrigued her. Memories of laughter and joy filled her mind, moments she had long forsaken in her pursuit of wealth and status. She realized that, in her quest for success, she had unknowingly deprived herself of the very connections that could bring her solace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows in her elegantly furnished home, Astrid felt an unexpected urge to reach out and connect. The idea of spending Christmas Eve alone, wrapped in her grief and regret, felt unbearable. The invitation was a lifeline, an opportunity to step outside the confines of her gilded cage. She could not ignore the flicker of hope that ignited within her, a chance to reconnect with her own humanity. With a deep breath, she made her decision. Astrid would attend Eric's dinner. The thought sent a rush of adrenaline through her, mingled with apprehension. What would she say? How would they perceive her? She could only imagine the surprised expressions on Eric's face and that of his family. Yet, something within her craved the experience, a desperate need to break free from the shackles of her past. On Christmas Eve, Astrid dressed with care, choosing a simple yet elegant outfit that would allow her to blend into Eric's world without losing her sense of self. As she gazed at her reflection one last time, she felt a shift within her, a glimmer of hope that perhaps this night could mark the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The cold air nipped at her cheeks as she stepped outside, her heart racing with anticipation and trepidation. The drive to Eric's modest home was filled with an unsettling mix of excitement and doubt. She could almost hear the whispers of her previous self, cautioning her against this decision, reminding her of the walls she had built around her heart. Yet, she pressed on, her resolve strengthening with every passing moment. Arriving at Eric's home, she was struck by the warm glow emanating from the windows. The laughter of children and the scent of a home-cooked meal wafted through the air, enveloping her like a comforting embrace. It was a stark contrast to the coldness of her own mansion, where silence reigned supreme. Taking a deep breath, she approached the door, her hand trembling slightly as she raised it to knock. As the door swung open, Astrid was met with a scene that tugged at her heartstrings. Eric stood before her, surprise etched across his features, his eyes widening in disbelief. Behind him, she could see his family bustling around the cozy living room, their laughter and joy radiating warmth that felt foreign to her. In that moment, she understood the weight of her decision, the significance of stepping into a world where kindness and connection reigned supreme. She crossed the threshold, stepping into a realm of warmth and acceptance. The atmosphere was filled with the sounds of celebration, the clinking of glasses, and the soft melodies of Christmas carols playing in the background. Astrid felt a rush of emotions as she took in the scene. The decorations were simple yet heartfelt, the table adorned with homemade dishes that spoke of love and tradition. For a fleeting moment, she felt out of place, her high society upbringing clashing with the simplicity of Eric's world. But as she glanced at Eric's family, their smiles genuine and welcoming, she felt the barriers she had built around her begin to crumble. The warmth they exuded was infectious, drawing her in, urging her to let go of the past and embrace the present. And so, in that moment of vulnerability, Astrid Lindgren took her first step towards transformation. She had chosen to embrace the connections she had long forsaken, to step into a world that promised healing and redemption. The night ahead held the potential for new beginnings, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope igniting within her heart. Astrid Lindgren stood at the threshold of Eric's modest home, her heart racing as she took a moment to absorb the scene before her. The small house, adorned with simple decorations, exuded warmth and life. Laughter echoed within, a stark contrast to the silence that had enveloped her mansion for weeks. The inviting glow of the lights spilling from the windows painted a picture of a family united in celebration, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope mixed with uncertainty. As she stepped inside, the air filled with the rich scent of roasted meat and baked goods, a comforting aroma that momentarily disarmed her. Eric's family gathered around a modest dining table, their faces lighting up with surprise and delight at her unexpected arrival. Astrid, always the epitome of poise and control, felt a rush of vulnerability as she faced their warm smiles. They welcomed her not as a billionaire who towered over them, but as a human being seeking connection. The stark contrast of her usual life, where she was often met with fear and servitude, struck her deeply. Eric's wife, with her gentle demeanor, approached Astrid, offering her a glass of mulled wine. The woman's kindness was disarming, and Astrid found herself accepting the drink, her fingers trembling slightly as she raised it to her lips. The warmth of the beverage spread through her, and for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to relish the sensation of being part of a family gathering. Children scurried around, their laughter ringing like chimes, and Astrid couldn't help but feel a pang of longing for the joy and connection that had always eluded her. Despite her initial discomfort, she resolved to maintain her aloofness, a protective barrier she had built over the years. With a practiced smile, she engaged in small talk with the family, attempting to navigate this unfamiliar territory. They shared stories of holiday traditions, how they decorated their home each year, and the simple joys that came with being together. Astrid listened, an observer at first, her mind racing with thoughts of her own life. A life filled with opulence yet devoid of the warmth and laughter that filled this humble abode. As Eric's father began recounting humorous tales from his own childhood, Astrid felt a strange sensation welling up within her. The laughter that erupted from the family was infectious, and she found herself slowly letting go of the tight grip she held on her emotions. Each chuckle and shared glance among the family members chipped away at the wall she had built, revealing the echoes of her own past. Moments where she could have chosen kindness over cruelty, connection over isolation. With every passing minute, the laughter and warmth enveloped her like a soft blanket, yet uncertainty lingered. Astrid's thoughts drifted to the time she had belittled Eric for his simple lifestyle, convinced that her wealth and status made her superior. It was a bitter pill to swallow, acknowledging the truth that had been hidden beneath layers of arrogance and pride. Here, in this modest home, she witnessed the beauty of genuine human connection, something she had sacrificed at the altar of her ambition. As the evening progressed, Astrid felt a shift within herself. The laughter of children, the playful banter between Eric and his siblings, and the tender glances shared between husband and wife began to awaken something dormant inside her. The realization that she had missed out on the simple joys of life weighed heavily on her heart. She had spent years wrapped in the cocoon of her wealth, believing it to be a shield against the vulnerabilities of life. But now, in this moment, she understood that it had only served to isolate her further. Feeling a surge of courage, Astrid took a breath and began to share her own story. The words flowed more easily than she anticipated, and as she spoke, the room fell silent, all ears attentive to her narrative. She recounted her life, the pressures of being a billionaire, the expectations that had suffocated her spirit, and the loneliness that had crept in after her husband's death. The vulnerability in her voice was palpable, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her regrets. Eric listened intently, his expression a mix of empathy and understanding. He offered no judgment, only a steady presence that encouraged her to continue. As she poured out her heart, Astrid realized that her past mistakes did not define her. They were simply chapters in a much larger story. The warmth of the family around her created a safe space where she could lay bare her soul without fear of rejection. In that moment of openness, Astrid caught a glimpse of what it meant to be truly alive. She reflected on the countless opportunities she had squandered, moments when she could have chosen to uplift others, but instead had chosen to belittle or dismiss them. The realization felt like a heavy fog lifting, revealing a path toward redemption she had thought was lost forever. The laughter that once felt foreign now resonated within her, and she found herself smiling genuinely for the first time in what felt like ages. As the night continued, Astrid glanced around the room, her heart swelling with an unfamiliar feeling, belonging. The family shared their hopes and dreams, their laughter intertwining with stories of past struggles. Astrid felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for Eric's invitation, a simple act that had opened the door to a world she had long since shut out. She began to understand the importance of community, of standing together through trials and triumphs, and how profoundly she had missed that connection in her own life. With each passing moment, she felt the barriers she had constructed begin to crumble. The warmth of Eric's family wrapped around her like a protective cocoon, and she realized that perhaps, just perhaps, she could allow herself to be vulnerable. The notion of building new friendships, of reaching out to those she had once scorned, began to take root in her heart. There was something liberating about acknowledging her flaws and embracing the possibility of change. The evening continued to unfold like a beautiful tapestry, each thread woven with laughter, shared experiences, and the gentle acceptance of one another's imperfections. Astrid found herself lost in the stories being told, each tale echoing with the underlying message of resilience and the power of human connection. She understood now that she had the power to shape her narrative, to make amends for her past, and to forge new relationships that would enrich her life. As she reflected on the evening, a sense of peace washed over her. Astrid knew that the road ahead would not be easy. It would take time to mend the wounds she had inflicted on herself and others. But for the first time in years, she felt hopeful about what lay ahead. The walls that had isolated her for so long were beginning to crack, allowing the light of possibility to seep in. She was no longer just a billionaire hidden behind a facade of arrogance. She was a woman ready to embrace the beauty of connection and the transformative power of kindness. The air in Eric's modest home was thick with warmth and the rich aroma of spiced meats and freshly baked bread. Laughter echoed off the walls, mingling with the soft glow of fairy lights strung across the room. Astrid Lindgren sat at the long wooden table, her initial discomfort slowly melting away as she found herself enveloped in the genuine camaraderie that surrounded her. The clinking of glasses and the sound of cheerful banter created an atmosphere starkly different from the cold isolation of her mansion. As the dinner progressed, the conversation flowed easily, and Astrid felt a sense of ease that she hadn't experienced in a long time. The children, with their wide eyes and infectious laughter, engaged her with stories about their Christmas traditions, and for the first time in years, she laughed. Deep, genuine laughter that resonated within her, echoing in the chambers of her heart that had been locked away for so long. The joy in their eyes reminded her of the warmth of family gatherings she had long since abandoned, replaced by sterile boardroom meetings and lavish yet empty parties. However, just as she began to fully immerse herself in the moment, the atmosphere shifted abruptly. A disagreement erupted between Eric and his brother, Michael, the jovial spirit of the evening quickly dissipating. Their voices rose, filled with tension as they exchanged sharp words that cut through the air like daggers. Astrid watched, her brow furrowing as the laughter faded and the warmth turned brittle, like glass teetering on the edge of shattering. The argument revealed raw emotions that mirrored the conflicts she had buried deep within herself. Eric's face flushed with frustration, while Michael's expression shifted from anger to hurt. The love between them tangled up in misunderstandings and unspoken grievances. Astrid felt a pang of empathy for both men. Though their familial bonds were strained, she recognized the pain of unresolved issues that could lead to fractures in relationships. She recalled her own past, her husband Lars, whom she had often pushed away with her arrogance, and the friendships she had neglected in her pursuit of success. The realization washed over her like a cold wave, and in that moment, she understood the fragility of connection. As the argument escalated, Astrid's heart raced. The urge to intervene surged within her, fueled by a burgeoning desire to foster understanding rather than division. The words bubbled up, unbidden, and before she could second-guess herself, she spoke. Her voice, though hesitant at first, cut through the tension that hung in the air. She offered her perspective on family and forgiveness, drawing from her own experiences of loneliness and regret. Family is not just about blood, she began, her gaze shifting between the two brothers. It's about the moments we choose to share, the love we decide to nurture. We can hold on to our grievances, but in doing so, we risk losing the people we love. Her words, laden with sincerity, hung in the air, silencing the argument momentarily. It was a bold move for someone who had spent so much time in the shadows of her own arrogance. Both Eric and Michael paused, their expressions shifting as they processed her insight. Astrid could see the gears turning in their minds, the walls they had built around their hearts beginning to crack. She felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, a connection forming not just between herself and Eric, but also bridging the gap between the brothers. In that moment, she realized how desperately she had been seeking this kind of connection, the kind that made life feel fuller, richer. As the tension dissipated, Eric's demeanor softened. The fight drained from his voice, replaced by a quiet vulnerability. He turned to Astrid, gratitude shining in his eyes. The family gathered around the table felt the shift as well, the warmth returning slowly, like the first rays of sun breaking through a winter's chill. In that intimate setting, Astrid was met with a newfound sense of belonging, one she had long thought was beyond her reach. The dinner resumed, and the atmosphere transformed once again. Laughter returned, this time underscored by a shared understanding of the complexities of family and the necessity of forgiveness. Astrid felt herself enveloped in a cocoon of acceptance, a stark contrast to the judgment she had often wielded as a shield in her own life. She found herself sharing stories, small anecdotes from her past that she had kept hidden, revealing the layers of her vulnerability. It was liberating to speak without fear of judgment, to let others see the woman behind the facade of wealth and power. She spoke of her late husband, of moments they had shared that were filled with laughter, but also tinged with the bitterness of misunderstandings. She recounted her regrets, the times she could have chosen kindness but instead opted for a cold dismissal. It was a cathartic release, one that left her feeling lighter than she had in years. Eric listened intently, nodding along as she spoke, his eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that made her feel seen. In that exchange, a bond began to form between them, one built on shared experiences of loss and the search for redemption. It was a moment of connection that transcended their previous roles as employer and employee, revealing the humanity that lay beneath their titles. As the evening continued, Astrid's heart swelled with emotion. She had walked into Eric's home as a woman burdened by her past, but she was beginning to feel the weight lift. The laughter and warmth wrapped around her like a blanket, offering solace she hadn't known she needed. The argument had served as a catalyst, pushing her to confront not just the rift between Eric and Michael, but also the chasm she had created in her own life. With every shared story and laughter that filled the room, Astrid realized that she had the power to change her narrative. She could choose to embrace the connections she had long rejected. Eric's family, with their open hearts and genuine spirits, had shown her a glimpse of what a different life could look like. A life filled with the warmth of shared experiences, the comfort of understanding, and the joy of forgiveness. The night wore on, and as Astrid looked around at the smiling faces, she understood that this dinner was more than just a meal. It was a turning point. It was a reminder that it was never too late to change, to seek forgiveness, and to extend a hand to those she had once overlooked. In that moment, surrounded by the laughter and love of a family she had only just begun to know, Astrid Lindgren felt the stirrings of hope blooming within her. A hope that promised a different future, one filled with connection and the courage to embrace vulnerability. As the evening wound down, the warmth of the Christmas gathering lingered in the air, wrapping around Astrid like a soft blanket against the chill of the world outside. Laughter and gentle conversation filled Eric's modest home, a stark contrast to the cold, echoing halls of her own mansion. The scent of cinnamon and roasted meats still wafted through the space, mingling with the soft glow of the fairy lights that adorned the small living room, creating a magical atmosphere that felt almost surreal to Astrid. Eric's family, having embraced her presence, shared their hopes and dreams for the future. Each heartfelt wish resonated through the room, weaving a tapestry of connection that Astrid had long thought unattainable. She watched as Eric's brother, a tall man with kind eyes, stood up to apologize for the earlier conflict. His voice, steady yet soft, filled the space with sincerity as he acknowledged the tensions that had briefly disrupted their joyful gathering. Astrid felt a stirring in her heart, an emotion she had buried deep within herself for far too long. She witnessed how family dynamics, fraught with misunderstandings and unspoken grievances, could be mended with a simple act of humility. This was a lesson she had ignored for years, lost in her own arrogance and self-importance. As they shared their wishes for the future, she could see the genuine love and care reflected in their faces, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of belonging. Their hopes were simple yet profound: health, happiness, and the strength to navigate the challenges life would throw at them. Astrid's own heart ached with the realization of how far removed she had been from such basic yet crucial sentiments. She had spent so much time building her empire, her walls fortified against the world, that she had forgotten the importance of connection, of being part of something larger than herself. As the family gathered for a group hug, Astrid hesitated, her instincts telling her to retreat into her shell. But then, in a moment of courage, she stepped forward. The embrace was warm and all-encompassing, and she felt the barriers around her heart begin to crumble. In that moment, she understood that she had been missing this, the feeling of being accepted, of being part of a family. But just as she began to savor the sweetness of the moment, the peaceful atmosphere shattered. The television, which had been muted in the background, suddenly blared to life, drawing everyone's attention. A news report flickered on the screen, the words "scandal" and "embezzlement" echoing ominously in her ears. Astrid's heart sank as she recognized the face of one of her former business partners, a man she had once trusted implicitly. The report detailed how he had been siphoning funds from the company, betraying not only her trust but also the livelihoods of countless employees. The world around her blurred as the implications of the news sank in. Her empire, which she had built with such pride, was now at the brink of crumbling. Fear gripped her heart, tightening its hold as she envisioned the chaos that would ensue. The layoffs, the shattered lives, the inevitable backlash against her leadership. Astrid felt a wave of nausea wash over her. In that moment, she was no longer the powerful billionaire. She was a vulnerable woman facing the consequences of her past decisions. She realized that her arrogance had blinded her to the realities of her business, to the people who relied on her. In her pursuit of success, she had neglected the very foundation that made it possible: her employees. The room around her faded as she grappled with the magnitude of the situation. Eric's family continued to watch the news, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Astrid could see their concern, not for her wealth or status, but for the people who would be affected by this betrayal. This was the moment when everything shifted for her. With newfound courage, a determination began to rise within her. She could not allow her empire to fall apart without a fight. More importantly, she could not allow herself to fall back into the isolation that had characterized her life after Lars' death. She had spent too long in the shadows of her own making, too long rejecting the very connections that could guide her through adversity. Astrid's mind raced as she formulated a plan. She would face the issue head-on, not as the arrogant billionaire who had once looked down on her employees, but as a leader who had learned the importance of humility and connection. She could no longer afford to distance herself from the people who worked tirelessly to uphold her empire. After all, they were not just cogs in a machine. They were individuals with dreams, families, and aspirations of their own. Turning her attention back to Eric's family, she felt a sense of clarity wash over her. The warmth they had shown her was a stark reminder of what she had been missing all along. With a deep breath, she made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She would extend her hand to Eric, not just as an employee, but as a partner. In a moment that felt both terrifying and liberating, she looked directly at Eric. He met her gaze with a mix of surprise and curiosity. Astrid could see the kindness in his eyes, the understanding that had grown between them throughout the evening. With a steady voice, she offered him a job as a consultant for her company, a role that would not only allow him to share his insights, but also give her a chance to rebuild the trust she had so carelessly neglected. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Eric's family exchanged glances, a mix of disbelief and hope lighting up their faces. Astrid felt a rush of vulnerability, exposing her intentions to the very people she had once dismissed. Yet, in that moment, she felt more empowered than ever. She was no longer just Astrid Lindgren, the wealthy billionaire. She was a woman willing to change, to learn, and to grow. As Eric processed her offer, she could see the wheels turning in his mind. This was not just a job. It was an opportunity to create something meaningful together. Astrid had no illusions that this would be easy, but she was ready to face the challenges ahead. The path to redemption was not without its obstacles, but she was determined to embrace it. The atmosphere in the room shifted once more, this time infused with a sense of hope and renewal. Astrid felt the weight of her past mistakes begin to lift, replaced by the promise of a new beginning. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life, and she could feel the warmth of connection wrapping around her once again. In that moment, surrounded by Eric's family and infused with the spirit of Christmas, Astrid Lindgren finally understood the true meaning of the season. It was not about wealth or power. It was about love, connection, and the courage to face one's own demons. With her heart open and her spirit renewed, she embraced the journey ahead, ready to transform her life and the lives of those around her.